Hello lovely people. I thought today I would review two botanical themed books that I have read recently.
Sophie Vlogs.
I recently did this with two queer Dracula retellings, and I kind of just liked the format of like one video to talk about two things that are slightly linked to each other, so I thought I would do that for this. The fiction book I want to talk about is Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, and then the non-fiction book is The Land Where Lemons Grow by Helena Attlee. I'm going to start with this one because I think I have more to say on this than I do on this, but I just happened to read these both at the same time, and because there is a big theme of botany and that sort of thing running throughout them, I just thought this would be a nice place to sort of round them both up. So, The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert is on my radar because of Olive over at Book Olive. She recommended reading this alongside Sea People by Christina Thompson and Gathering Moss by Kimmerer, and I am so glad that I did read both of those. I read them before reading this, and I think that it really did enhance my reading experience of this. This follows Alma Whittaker. The first part of the narrative actually follows her father, Henry. He sort of, from very poor origins, builds himself up into having this sort of like botanical empire. He is on one of Captain Cook's voyages. He sort of is very, very ruthless as a character and builds up this empire for himself, and then he settles in America, and then he has Alma. And then this follows Alma's life. What I found interesting about this is the back says, her passion for botany leads her far from home, from London to Peru to Tahiti, in pursuit of that rare specimen knowledge. And I think that that set me up for a slightly different reading experience than the one I had, and I did enjoy the reading experience I had. That makes it sound like most of this book is Alma off having all these adventures, and that is not what this book is. It takes a very long time for us to get to the point where she leaves America, and actually I was okay with that. Actually what this book is Alma spends most of her adult life remaining on the estate at Whiteacre, looking after her father, managing business dealings, studying moss and that sort of thing. And by the time she leaves and starts having adventures, she is a much older woman. And one of my buzzwords is fiction where the protagonist is an older woman, because it's a type of fiction that I don't think I've read that many books of, and it's one that I would like to explore further because I hope to one day be an older woman, and I just think it's really important, this idea like adventures are not just for young people, and I think that sometimes we can have a lot of pressure built up that gets internalized by younger people, where they expect to have got their life sorted out by like ridiculously young ages, whereas actually like becoming older can be very freeing. It can be the time that you have your adventures and that sort of stuff. So I loved that we did get to see an older woman having adventures and pursuing knowledge and that sort of thing. Another thing I really did love about this was all of the focus on botany. So Alma, because she is brought up in such luxuriant wealth, she is encouraged from a very young age to seek out knowledge. If she has questions, find answers to them and that sort of thing. At the point where she realizes that her life is going to be centered around this estate, she ends up dedicating lots of her time to exploring the concept of moss. And I loved all of this. She comes up with this concept of time where it's like you have human lifespan time, and it's so small, and you have divine time, which is like the concept of like the time that it took God to create the world and the existing on a divine level, and that is so huge. And then somewhere in between those you have moss time, because from our perspective the growth and change of moss is it doesn't seem like it does anything, but that's just because it is living on a different time schedule. I have seen on Goodreads that a lot of people were not in any way interested in all of that sort of botanical moss talk. Like, I was here for it. I loved it. I was really thankful that I read Gathering Moss by Kimmerer, because I think it gave a lot of the science and the knowledge and that sort of thing. So when she was observing things, I already sort of had a sense of what she would be finding answers to, because I kind of had read this book. Another thing I liked about this is that Alma is a very flawed protagonist in many ways. She is very strong-willed and she can be very selfish, and I kind of liked that she was allowed to be those things. I just think it's really interesting to have a heroine who is allowed to be flawed. Like, she makes mistakes and she regrets her mistakes, but she does also grow from her mistakes and learn from them, and I really appreciated that. There were a number of other female characters in this who I found really interesting, and I think one thing that this book does is there's a lot that sort of happens in the background. So, for example, Alma's adopted sister is a very interesting character. She is heavily involved in the abolitionist movement, but a lot of her plotline sort of happens in the background because it's sort of like we hear things that she is doing, but we don't get to see them. And sometimes I really liked that because I liked that sort of like Alma herself is kind of living in Moss time because she's detached herself from the rest of society in some ways, and so you have these like background glimpses into issues that are being sort of addressed, but like Alma's just very busy looking at mosses, and I understand that that might be a frustrating experience. I think one way that I did find it frustrating is in regards to Alma's friend. I felt like there were some topics being addressed in what happens to Alma's friend, especially in regards to sort of treatment of women in that time in regards to concepts like hysteria and that sort of thing. I think one thing that I did find frustrating about this is I felt like that character kind of got dropped in a way that I was disappointed about, because I had thought we were maybe making a point about the way that like women who don't adhere to like acceptable behavior get ostracized and treated as hysterical, and in some ways we were, but also I felt like Alma really let that character down. I don't know, that's one of my niggles that I have for sure, but I think that sort of like narrative technique of having things happen sort of in the background and have points made in the background of things was very interesting. I can't think of a lot of examples of other books where that happened, but it was sort of like an interesting way of framing some of these discussions. Another thing that I was sort of had mixed feelings of is sort of like the romance plotline of this. It is very tied to sort of these slightly more like mystical, otherworldly aspects. I don't know, I wasn't super invested in that, so I didn't super love also that aspect of the plotline. I'm being very vague about it because I don't wish to spoil anything, but if you've read the book and would like to have a more in-depth conversation about how those things are handled, do feel free to leave a comment down below. That was definitely sort of like an aspect of the book that kind of lost me a bit, I think. On the whole, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think I'm going to draw my thoughts to a close now because I am in danger of rambling and getting off topic somewhat. On the whole, this is a chunky book and I took my time with it. So it was definitely one that I read like at a slower pace because I was sort of taking it all in. It covers a lot of time, so I spent a lot of time on it. I did enjoy when we did get to travel to other places like Tahiti and stuff like that. That was also incredibly interesting, and again, was really glad that I had read Sea People before reading this because I think it gave a lot of context as well into the time period and that sort of stuff. So yeah, on the whole, I did really enjoy this. I did have some niggles which stopped me from rating it higher, but definitely an interesting book. I've never read any Elizabeth Gilbert before, and from the sounds of it, her other books can be quite different, so I'd be interested to hear from you if you're an Elizabeth Gilbert fan. Given how I feel about this book, is there somewhere I should go next in reading her work? Do let me know. To move on to the non-fiction book, this is The Land Where Lemons Grow by Helena Attlee. This is essentially tracing the history of citrus fruit within Italy. Really enjoyed reading this at the same time as this because although they are dealing with very different things and citrus fruit is not really mentioned in the signature of all things, it is this same concept of like just interesting botanical knowledge. This is very much like a blend of like history, art, food, all of the ways in which citrus has influenced Italy. I found it incredibly interesting learning about sort of like the origins of citrus, how they came to Italy, and then she kind of moves around geographically, and each chapter explores sort of like a different topic. This is very much one where if you're very logical and you like things to be very ordered, you might not necessarily get on well with this, because what I liked about this is that it kind of just felt like we were noodling around, and it was like, oh, this chapter, shall I tell you about bergamot in the perfume industry? And I was like, sure. And then a different chapter where we were like, should we talk about like citron? And I'm like, again, okay. Whereas if you're someone who really likes things like mapped out in like a logical, clear, concise way where we're like building an argument, that's not really what this is. This is one that I think it would be very good to like dip in and out of if you're like on holiday. While she has obviously done so much research and she's telling you all about the places that she's been, the people she's talked to, the insights she's been given, that sort of thing, it is also done in a way that felt quite like casual and chatty at the edges, because it is like every chapter is sort of just like a different topic that we're just going to chat about and discuss. I am now that obnoxious person who has too many random citrus facts that I keep sharing with people. So I did really enjoy this. It gave me a real appreciation for citrus in all of its different walks of life, whether it is like the use in the perfume industry, its use in cuisine, the way that the industry has changed, its use in like festivals, all stuff like this. I found it absolutely fascinating. I did really just enjoy settling down and dipping into each topic. So essentially, if you're someone who liked the botanical aspects of this, but you would like to read like a non-fiction that is not too intimidating, I think that this is a nice place to start because you can dip in, you can sort of as well figure out what aspects of citrus history most interest you, and then from there that might aid you in choosing some other like non-fiction that you'd like to explore further, that sort of thing. So yeah, I had a really fun time reading these books. I did read them literally at the same time as each other. I was reading them concurrently, and so it definitely created this really like fabulous little botanical exploration moment. I would be really interested to hear from you if you have recommendations for fiction or non-fiction that is to do with any aspect of botany that you thoroughly enjoyed. Please do let me know, because it is one of those topics where I feel very enthusiastic, but I also feel like I have no knowledge. Like I just keep getting peeks into other people's in-depth knowledge, and then I'm just still here like, fascinating. Don't know a thing. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to say this week. I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read any of these. Do leave a comment down below. Always brightens my little day. But yeah, otherwise I hope you're having a really lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.